Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone's doing well this evening. This is episode 39 of Karl's Spirit Month, or Karl's Spirits, I guess. We're no longer in a month. Tonight, we're going to be looking at Colonel E.H. Taylor's small batch of bottled in bond bourbon. This is actually the second bottle I've had to get into today, and this is a really nice little bourbon. So it's a Colonel E.H. Taylor small batch. This is a product of Buffalo Trace, which in turn used to be the George T. Stagg Distillery. And before that, it was the OFC, the Old Fire Copper Distillery, which was owned by Colonel Edmund Haynes Taylor, Jr. So this is Colonel Taylor's namesake bourbon produced by Buffalo Trace. So a little bit about Colonel Taylor. To say that he is bourbon royalty would be an understatement. Taylor was actually an orphan. Was raised for a time by his first cousin, General and later President Zachary Taylor, also of Kentucky. Taylor got into the bourbon business, and he pioneered many of the techniques and the equipment that are still used today to produce bourbon. But probably one of his biggest contributions, one of his most famous accolades, I guess you could say, is that he was one of about two or three key people that persuaded Congress to pass the 1897 Bottled in Bond Act. This Bottled in Bond Act required bourbons to be quality. And Haynes really was interested in the quality of his beloved bourbon. You see, at the time, bourbon was put in barrels and shipped all over the country, and people put it in their own bottles then in a store and sold it. They could put anything else in the bottle they wished, including things like arsenic and turpentine. They could put tobacco juice and old shoe polish wax and things like that to give it color and taste. And Taylor, along with a few other people, were very concerned about the quality of bourbon. And so they went before Congress and testified that there needed to be a federally recognized mandate that would ensure the quality of bourbon being produced. So think about that this is not a government saying there has to be regulations on a product. This is the producers asking Congress for protection of a product. So this is kind of an unheard of thing, and this is years, 7, 8 years before the FDA and all those other consumer acts under Theodore Roosevelt that began to protect quality of products. The Bottled in Bond Act itself requires bourbon to be a product of one distiller during one distilling season. It requires the bourbon to be housed in a federally bonded warehouse for a minimum of 4 years. And it requires that same bourbon to be bottled at exactly 100 proof. And that's what it's meant to be, bottled in bond. And originally, this little strip of paper is supposed to show that has been bonded. Now, we've seen that little strip of paper on a lot of products. A lot of them just put it there. Your bottled in bond product should be there. Some of the Old Foresters have the strip, and that was Gavin Brown's signature of quality, as he put the strip on there and signed his signature, showing his quality of the product. That was before the Bottled in Bond Act itself. But Old Taylor, or Colonel Taylor, is definitely bourbon royalty here. So a little bit about our pour tonight. There is no mash bill provided for this, although we do know that it uses Buffalo Trace's Mash Bill 1, which is 10% or less of rye. This is the same mash bill that Buffalo Trace uses for their signature Buffalo Trace bourbon. They use for Eagle Rare. They use for Stagg Jr., for example. It is 100 proof, which follows the Bottled in Bond Act, of course. And we also know, we don't know how old this bourbon is aged, but it is required to be at least 4 years under the Bottled in Bond Act. Some people say as high as 7. I'm guessing it's on the younger side of 7. It's probably closer to 5. But we also know that all the bourbon produced for the Taylor line of bourbons, and there are about 4 or 5 Taylor bottles in the line, are housed or warehoused rather in warehouses that were constructed by Taylor. And considering that Taylor owned the distillery that is now Buffalo Trace in the 1870s, these rickhouses have been around for 140, 150 years at this point. They have produced thousands and thousands of barrels of fine Kentucky bourbon. So in the glass, kind of down to a small pour here. Sorry about that. Maybe I should pour a little bit more in that glass. In the glass, though, it is actually a really nice medium to dark copper. It is not as dark as, say, the Stag, but it's got a nice dark tinge to it. Very, very pleasing. The sugar line or the line on the glass, very sticky. It's a medium line. It's not really fat. It's just kind of there. But it looks really, really nice on the glass, and it does not move. So it's a very, very sticky line. So on the nose, what I've noticed about this particular pour is you need to let it set for about 2 or 3 minutes. The alcohol will be very heavy on the nose as you first pour it. After a few minutes in the glass, though, it really resolves to a really heavy, sweet butterscotch and caramel. There's also some grain notes here, so it's kind of grain forward. It is dry corn. It's not dusty corn like we've seen in other bourbons, maybe, but it's a dry corn smell. It's just a really pleasant nose. Taste. This bourbon goes down very well. First of all, to me, it has a classic bourbon profile. Very front and center. Very heavy on the vanillas, very heavy on the charred oaks. It's got some sweet cinnamon right in the middle of the tongue. So you start with those vanillas and caramels on the tip of your tongue. Right about the middle of the tongue toward the back, you start to get that sweet cinnamon. And I never understood what sweet cinnamon is, but I always thought it was just a very spicy taste, but it's now become very sweet for me. There's some hints of dry corn still there, which is what makes me believe that this is on the younger side of 7 years, probably closer to 5. But there's also a little bit of at the back end as the, the finish begins. It leads to some leathers and some tobaccos, which I also really enjoy. It's that very dark, classic bourbon note. That finish. Get some allspice on the edges of the tongue. Gives you a nice burn down the throat. It's not unpleasant, just very, lets you know it's there. And gives you a really good Kentucky hug. Mouthfeel is a medium. And I think it's a little bit more watery than I would prefer. It's still enjoyable. I wish it was just a little bit more viscous, a little bit heavier on the mouthfeel. And I think this would be an incredible bourbon. Overall, my takeaway on this is that this is a very enjoyable bourbon. It's well balanced between sweet and spice. I think this is just a good, clean sipping bourbon. And it just leaves you feeling like you've really had something that was really kind of neat. It doesn't make you want to pound back 3 or 4 shots of it. It just makes you want to take sip after sip really slowly and enjoy. Makes you want to spend time with it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. If you could find this should be about a $40 bottle. Probably you're going to find it. It's going to be marked around the $50 range if you can find it. It has become highly sought after in the past few years, as many bourbons have. And so it's a little bit more difficult to find than some of the other bourbons we've looked at. So, Karl's scale. I'm going to go ahead and give this very pleasant bourbon a 4.5. That's a 4.5. I do that because I just enjoy the taste. I enjoy the story. I think what holds this back is the thinner mouthfeel and its lack of availability. If you could find this on the shelf all the time for $40, this would be an outstanding bourbon. As it is, I'm going to call it a 4.5. Again, all these ratings are subjective. These are my opinions and my opinions only. But I hope everyone enjoyed tonight. I hope you stay safe. I hope you find peace and happy pours.